Oh, right. So this is a new inaugural, I'm not going to call it a podcast because it's more of a series about the business of allied health. I thought it was a good chance to do this, given that I run CliniScribe, which supports hundreds of practice owners. So I thought I might take that opportunity to leverage it to share some of the wisdom and tips from our most successful practice owners. And first on our list is MK, or Michael Kenihan. So he's probably the most our industry veteran, actually. I don't know anyone with as much experience as him collectively. He was actually my mentor, disclaimer, 20 years ago at the LifeCare network with John Ford. So, welcome, Michael. I'm just going to keep it really short so we can actually break it up into snippets and casual. And the key thing is just to bring out the most engaging or useful or almost unexpected or doesn't have to be politically correct advice that you can give that may go viral. So, how many clinics have you run, Michael?
Welcome, Barry. Thanks very much for having me. Probably over the journey, more than 50 clinics, probably, of which about 13 of them were in the LifeCare network when I was involved with the corporate. I started in multidisciplinary sports medicine. My first practices were multidisciplinary as part of my career development. So they had their own challenges in their own way, a little bit different from unidisciplinary clinics.
Right. I'm going to select one. Which was your most successful or transformative clinic in your portfolio?
That's going to sound strange now, and maybe you learn as you go along, but there's a clinic that we started about 5 years ago in Healesville in a small house that has become the most successful clinic that I've run in terms of return on investment, but also in terms of delivery of service to a community. And it was partly because it was set up in a small, relatively small regional town where there was no full-time physiotherapy or podiatry service. And we did that in combination with a podiatrist where we share the rooms. So the cost of rent is diminished or decreased. And of all the factors I look at in clinic operations and profitability, Barry, it's the ones with the best rent as a percentage of billings that are generally the more productive and successful ones economically.
Very interesting there. So, it is not the most fanciest looking clinic with the latest Olympic lifting equipment, correct?
Those things augment the
Yeah.
product, as you would know, but at the end of the day, it's very difficult to change the cost of practitioner. It is possible to change the cost of your admin staff, but your rent generally is fixed. So if you can start with a good rental, it makes a big difference to that profitability.
That's very interesting that you say that because a lot of the younger clinicians tend to try to start in the metro area because it's more convenient and it's more about them, not the market. So great wisdom there, Michael.
It's funny you say that because it really is the first clinic that I've operated in a regional area. And it's
Wow,
happened towards the end of my career, interestingly.
that's really interesting. So you're still learning in the last
Well, there you
five
go.
years. There you go.
Totally.
So that's a great point there. So what was your biggest kind of early challenge building a clinic?
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to developing the quality of the practitioners. I'm a big believer in clinical excellence, as you would know, and getting people, clinical excellence doesn't happen overnight. So when you start a clinic regionally, we were lucky to have a young man who lived actually in the area to start with us. And getting him to the point whereby his quality as a new grad was at a high level because he was working more or less on his own was a challenge. And these days, I'm tending to not let younger grads work in a practice on their own, Barry, for that reason, because they
Interesting.
just don't have that quality of clinical excellence that they need to have.
And how did you go about mentoring this new grad in that small clinic?
Well, I used to go and visit him once a week out there, and I'd talk about commercial mentoring. And I had one of the partners in the group did the clinical, two of the partners did the clinical mentoring. They would go to the clinic only once a week because it was early days, and they would spend 2 hours with him teaching and then observing his patient treatments. So it was very hands on at a very small startup.
Very interesting because that sort of reflects some of the startup principles I've learned myself running CliniScribe, which is do things that don't scale. You can't just get away with the Zoom call now and then.
That's a fascinating point and a really important point because you've got to make the investment early to get the return later on. And I know you're a big advocate of that, but that in my career, that's something I've followed very much, of putting the necessary time in early and at the start. And then gradually, as people improve their capability, you can pull back a little bit as they learn and grow.
Yep. And what was the main thing you think the new grad sort of had a blind spot in early on that you had to correct, or that kind of unlocked them to grow in the clinic?
This is actually, it crosses across both clinical and commercial. He used to say to patients when he'd seen them the first time, "I'll see how you go and come back if you need to." Or he'd say, "Oh, I'll come back in 2 weeks." And we talked to him about the rationale around that. And a lot of younger practitioners have this sense that they don't want to overburden or overcost the patient and so on. But that's actually not good part of clinical excellence. Clinical excellence is about getting people better, more quickly, and back more sustainably to the activity that they need to do. It's not just about being fantastic with hands or reasoning. It's also about focusing on the client need. And we didn't see that was focusing on the client need. And the risk you take too commercially is that if you say to a patient, "Oh, you don't need to come back for 2 weeks," they go off and do something else, or they might even seek out the help of another practitioner. So it doesn't make sense at any level. So that was a big challenge with this particular individual.
Just a quick question around how did you work out that Hillsville was the right site? Did you go there, have a look, or did you
Well,
Google, or how did you find the demand there?
that's a really, really good question. I made 3 visits with the younger partner, who's the biggest equity partner of that practice now. We walked the street.
Wow.
I kid you not. We walked into every practice that was there. We did the secret shopper routine of what do you provide, et cetera, et cetera. So we identified there was nobody there of any significant period per week. Their availability was really limited. There was a practice that was run by a woman out of the hospital as a private practice 3 days a week. And we approached that particular person and said, "Look, why don't you come and work with us 1 or 2 sessions a week?" And then ultimately, we purchased that practice from her. So she moved that practice out of the hospital into our clinic, which gave it another leg up at that time too.
Very
So
smart.
it was just getting a feel. We got a feel for the town and the people in the town as well, Barry, which was really important.
No, that's a great point. Like, you can't just use ChatGPT and do a deep research on the area. This is what I'm
Well, we
noticing.
did our research. We knew what the premises were. We actually also found out in our learning that one end of the town, of the main strip of the town, the rentals were some 20% cheaper than the other. And they used to call it the Paris end of Hillsville and the suburban end of Hillsville.
All right.
So we went into the suburban end where the rental was also cheaper. So by doing our research, we were able to find those things out.
That's excellent. So what one key metric do you measure for a
Well,
physio business?
I actually have drilled it down to one number now, and the number is,
Wow.
it relates to growth, is the number of practitioner hours you have available per week.
Very interesting.
And we use the measure, Barry, of 80%. If you're 80% busy, you haven't got enough practitioners. Your availability isn't sufficient for people to be able to easily get an appointment. So rather than 100% busy, 80% is the key number. And when it's 80, you need more hours.
Very interesting. I remember at LifeCare, you used to teach availability, affability, ability.
I've got a little diagram in my book, The Health Practitioner's Journey, that I'm going to plug. But I've got a little diagram where it's got ability, availability, and affability.
That's the word.
And at the top of that is progress. So you actually get, by having those 3 ingredients, progress. And I love playing the game with new practitioners, which is the most important of availability, ability, and affability.
Awesome.
And they never quite get affability as being the most important.
No, they don't. I actually told my wife that. MK told me this. Availability is number 1, regardless. What is an unpopular, to be politically incorrect, doesn't matter, lesson that you've learned running a clinic that people should know about, that you don't hear in the business coach world and on social media, that you'd like to share?
Well, look, what's unpopular is when a practitioner is not growing and thriving as you would like them to, which results in some hard conversations sometimes, but I'll never forget the one I had with the young fellow who, after a year, his numbers weren't improving. He didn't appear to be enjoying what he was doing. And I went and visited him and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Well, look, I'm not actually sure I'm cut out to be a clinician." I went, "Oh, okay, well, let's talk about that." I said, "Has that got anything to do with why you're not thriving?" He said, "Yeah, I think so, because I feel as though I'm lost and I don't really get how to make the connection work better." So we talked then about him changing his career, and he went into a career in finance, interestingly enough. So by picking up on those numbers and looking at those numbers on a repetitive basis, you would expect certain pathways of improvement. He just wasn't improving. And that's a very difficult environment because you don't know how that person's going to deal with that issue. But he was honest and I was really direct with him. And he went on and he's very happily working in a finance career now. So you won't find that that's actually not just about a hunch. It's about looking at data too, Barry, which is
Right.
really important.
And how long do you leave it? How long do you give
Well,
them
I
the
think
chance?
I said to him, "You need to go away and figure out how you're going to build your next career." And at 6 months later, he left the practice. He did the best he possibly could for the time, but he was ready to leave. And he was only in his second year out, Barry. So we lost him to the profession.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
there you go. But the lesson I've got then is you just can't sit back and watch and wait and expect things to happen. If nothing's changing, you have to get involved and you have to intervene.
Very interesting. And I know you for a fact that you haven't burnt bridges. You're probably one of the only people I know who don't burn bridges after these kind of sticky, confronting situations. So great wisdom there. So lastly, you wrote a book which goes into much more detail around these type of topics and stories. Tell us about the book and then we can wrap up there.
Look, I wrote the book. I called it my passion project, called The Health Practitioner's Journey. And what I managed to get it down to is that there are 4 stages of a practitioner's journey. The first is that of clinical excellence and developing that, and there's a timeline for that. Then commercial success. So you've got to establish the excellence before you go for the commercial side of success. Then you start looking at leveraging your time and effort by maybe starting a business. That means that you're not earning all your income by what you do. And then you finish off at the end of that by leveraging the equity that you've developed in the business by selling that business. Now, I'm not saying everybody takes that path, and I make it very clear that some people are happy with clinical excellence, some are happy at commercial success, others who want to do more can go on and do more. And I finished the book, Barry, with a section called Harvesting Knowledge, where I highlight some of the elite people I've met over the journey and how they've actually not just continued to do their clinical practice, they've developed other skills, other business opportunities, other lecturing and education opportunities, etc. So I wanted to give the whole picture to people about what that is, and within that, a lot of anecdotes of my experience, because I think it's really important when mentoring people to be able to use that knowledge and experience you've got to assist others, because it makes it more real. And at the end of the day, people are interested in stories, Barry. So
Yeah.
that's really what it's about.
I'm happy for you to name drop some of these clinicians.
Oh, Lynn Watson was
Yep.
one. John Ford was another.
John
I mean,
Ford.
those whom you know, who's established a
Yes.
very successful business with commensable back pain. And there's another one of a podiatrist called Matthew Appleton, who actually vertically integrated his business, not just into treating people with podiatry, developing his own lab. And then he established stores called Active Feet for selling shoes, with podiatrists selling the shoes. So I loved his approach to the vertical integration of how he used his skill to actually go right up the line to a tertiary objective of actually having retail stores selling shoes. So they were some of the ones I highlighted.
All right. Thanks for your time, Michael. Thanks for sharing all that. That's a lot of gold nuggets there. I'll do my best to summarize it eventually in a little
Oh, well,
book and we can share
Barry,
it.
AI will do something with it, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use AI. That's right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time too, Barry.
Thank you.
All the
Thank you.
best.
It's my
Bye.
pleasure. Bye.